Welcome back, Troglodytes, to the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today, the Les Paul Recording 2. This instrument is based off of Les Paul, the man himself, his favorite model that Gibson ever made for him. That's right, his name is on all the other Les Paul guitars, but this is what he personally preferred to play ever since they were introduced in the very late 60s. Essentially, the claim to fame for these models originally was pure, honest, clean tones. That's what Les was all about. He worked his entire life just trying to get all the distortion out of his guitar, and then people come along in, the 70s, 80s, they just add a bunch of it in there. He accomplished this by using low impedance pickups. That's why these kind of look a little bit goofy, because they record in low Z, whereas every single other guitar records in high impedance, high Z. Doing a little bit of Les Paul history, they were first introduced in 1952 as the Gold Tops, and then discontinued around 1960. Yeah, there's a few 61s out there, before the SG body shape came along. Les's name was taken off those instruments around 63, and Gibson and him kind of just severed ties at that point until the Les Paul was reintroduced for 1968. It's at that point in time when Gibson was kind of buttering up Les Paul that they let him create his own low impedance series. This is gonna be a video full of, nerdy details and specs that I don't think I've seen anybody else really compile. I'm not saying I'm an expert on these, but I would like to help everybody understand the low impedance Les Paul recording model a little bit better. So to start off here, the Les Paul Recording had two predecessors before that. They are known as the Les Paul Personal and the Les Paul Professional. Think of these two models like the Les Paul Custom and the Les Paul Standard. The Personal had gold hardware, an ebony fingerboard with custom appointments such as the large block inlays, and you had the split diamond on the headstock. It also featured very nice back edge binding as well as on the top and Kluson waffle back tuners. Another very interesting appointment to these is a built-in XLR jack up on the top bout. Les liked to plug in a microphone there during his live performances to talk to his audience. These instruments are very rare, with only around 146 of them ever shipped. And then the Les Paul Professional, again, it's kind of like a Les Paul Standard based off of the Personal. It had chrome hardware, rosewood fretboard, the Les Paul Standard style trapezoid inlays, but it didn't have anything fancy on the headstock besides the Gibson logo. It didn't have back binding, and they ditched the whole microphone input. But what both of these did have in common is an ABR1 bridge. Most didn't have volutes, kind of depends on when they were made. But the electronics remained the same. You have a three-way toggle switch on the upper bout like you normally have on a Les Paul. You have an in and out of phase switch with a 3-position tone selector. You had a volume, decade, treble, and bass control knob. The outputs were located on the side, and you needed a transformer cable in order for them to work with a regular guitar amp. Fancy electronics were definitely geared towards clean sounds. So let's go ahead and hear the decade rotary switch being demonstrated, as well as how the tone selector works. Eventually, those two models were phased out for one singular model called the Les Paul Recording. This is the famous one that most people know about. One of the main differences between the recording and the personal and professional is the recording uses a top route system. That's why you got this big plate on here. It kind of utilizes what they did with the SG Deluxes at the time. You might think it's ugly, but it's just kind of a sign of the times, you know? So this uses all the same knobs. Again, you got the volume, the decade, the treble, and the bass, but they moved the toggle switch from the upper bout down to all the other controls. They built in the transformer with a switch to switch the guitar from high Z to low Z, so you no longer needed that special cable. They moved the output jack from the side to the front of the instrument, and most of them utilized a harmonica bridge instead of the ABR1. They borrowed the feature from the Personal as a Les Paul custom headstock overlay, but they took the Professional's rosewood fretboard and they adopted the small block inlays like you would see on SGs of this time. So these things were out from approximately like 1970 to like somewhere around 76 when they released another version of the Les Paul Recording. It doesn't actually have an official different title, they just kind of changed the layout of these instruments. To collectors, it's known as version 2. So Les Paul Recording version 2, it's the exact same guitar with just a very few modifications. Mainly, they changed the layout. So instead of the knobs being on the outside in kind of like a semicircle pattern, they moved them closer to the player in a straight line. They gave the instrument two outputs, one for high Z and one for low Z, and they moved the pickup selector switch back to the regular upper bout position. So by doing the double output jack, that allowed them to get rid of one of the switches, and it really cleaned up the look of that control plate. And as with most Les Pauls at this time, they switched over to a 3-piece maple neck. And also note the multi-piece maple top now. And then those lasted until about something like 1979. I'm kind of fuzzy on the dates, I'm not 100% sure on them, but this kind of gives you an idea. So throughout the 70s, these things existed. And it wasn't until about 2013 when Gibson thought, well, maybe we should reissue this instrument. So here comes the Les Paul Recording 2. That's right, the official title is Les Paul Recording 2. This is not a reissue. It's not a tribute. It is a sequel to the original recording models. They weren't trying to do a perfect reissue. What they were trying to do was model this after the one that Les played famously at the Iridium in New York for years. So it's kind of like a mix of all the different models here, but mainly the version 2 in look. The easiest way to think about this instrument is it's the Les Paul Recording for dummies. They simplified this guitar so much. The first main feature that they stripped here is they ditched the decade treble and bass knob controls. This now has a volume for your neck, a tone for your neck, a volume for your bridge, a tone for your bridge. Super simplified. You have relatively the same toggle switch location down here, that way they didn't have to do extra routing to the body, but instead of having the F and R for front and rear markings, they kind of made it look like a poker chip here. You've got rhythm and treble. There's not actually a chip there though, it's just printed on the material. They removed the 3-position tone selector switch. Think of that one kind of like a Telecaster style switch. They just ditched that completely, which once again ruins some of your tonal opportunities. But instead of that, they decided to double up your switches. Instead of having 2 switches, we now have 4. And what do these do? Oh my goodness, it's such a letdown. So this says single dual, single dual. What that is essentially doing is splitting the coils in your pickups. So you've got single coil sounds and then you've got humbucker sounds for each of the respective pickups, neck and bridge. They could have easily just did that with a push-pull pot, but they just made it look fancy in the style of a Les Paul Recording by having switches here. Your neck switch is in and out of phase for both pickups. So that'll get you your normal sound and then kind of a quacky vintage tone. And then the 4th one is only for when you're doing your recording with low Z. It switches it between lift and ground. I'll be honest with you guys, I have no idea what that's changing. They made the Bigsby mandatory. every single one of these things shipped with one of these pain in the butts to string. And then this one features a maple top, similar to the second version of the Les Paul recording from the 70s. And they were only available in a natural finish. The original recording models, Bigsby was optional. Some of them had it stock from the factory, many did not. And you could find these in some exotic finishes. Another difference is weight relief. The originals did not have any weight relief because, well, it didn't exist until 1983. The reissue has traditional weight relief, which I'm assuming Gibson means it has the 9 holes. But let me tell you, this thing, the weight doesn't come from the wood, it comes from all of this. This thing's still 10.5 pounds, which is heavier than the recording that I owned. So yes, these are just as heavy as the originals. Something else that they kind of destroyed on this model is this no longer has the cream binding along the neck. The originals kind of had a black and cream sandwich, kind of like the Spotlight Specials. But this one, they just gave it black, so it almost looks like it doesn't have binding at all. Kind of a letdown, because look how beautiful the black and cream looks on the body. Instead of an ABR1 or reissuing the harmonica bridge, they went with a Nashville-styled one. Huh, why do I have a metric bridge on here? I don't have fret nibs either. It's a fake! No, it's not a fake. Somebody just replaced this one for a roller bridge, which required changing out the posts. So that is a modification on this one. And in 2014, Gibson did not do fret nibs. This one was made like 2 days before 2014, so it's still 14 spec. So that's another difference, no fret nibs. Another small difference is the reissues are not a pancake body. Essentially what a pancake body is, it's a mahogany, small strip of maple, and then another mahogany sandwich. Gibson used that type of body style from like 1969 to about 75. I mean, you can find them all the way until 78, but they kind of start phasing them out around that time. So these have got a pure mahogany body, and this one in particular has a 2-piece maple top. They've got the same mahogany neck and a rosewood fretboard. But now for the biggest thing ever that's just gonna blow your mind. These are not low impedance pickups. They didn't put low impedance pickups in the low impedance guitar reissue. What did they do this for? That makes no sense to me. It kind of makes me upset. A lot of people don't realize this. Gibson did not want to spend the money to recreate the low impedance pickups. So these are regular stacked humbuckers, kind of in single coil look right here. They at least put the Gibson logo on them, but what the originals did, remember, these pickups would take it out in low impedance. And if you wanted to plug it into a normal amp, you had to convert it into a high impedance one with a special cable. The Les Paul Recording 2 is the exact opposite. It sends the high Z output through a Jensen audio transformer, which then makes it low impedance. So it's not the pickups themselves that are low impedance. They're being transformed into that in the signal. We'll see that illustrated here shortly on the bench. So that just kind of ruins this guitar. It really is Les Paul Recording 2 because you could not call it a tribute with these pickups or any of these features. But with all that said, is the Les Paul Recording 2 bad? No, this thing is just fantastic. I can't believe that they actually recreated the vintage tones that they had in the originals. Sure, it might not have all the blingy features and the small nuances of the originals that made very tiny little changes that could add up to a lot, but they simplified this for the modern player. I felt the same love and admiration for the tones of this instrument as I did for the vintage ones, and that's something I almost never feel. But one last fun feature that they did get right, at least, is the reissue of the volute at the back of the headstock. So I hope this video kind of helped you understand the Les Paul Recording a little bit better. Just to name a few of the other low impedance models that Gibson made at this time. The Les Paul Triumph bass, the bass version of this guitar. There's the Les Paul Signature, which you can check out this review to learn more about that. And then the Les Paul Signature bass, better known as the Jack Cassidy model. And another often forgotten model is the Les Paul Jumbo, which is an acoustic guitar. So now let's throw this thing on the workbench and take a look at all of these individual parts. First, the pickups. I really enjoy that they still left the Gibson branding on them because that's something that kind of makes the originals unique. But from here you can see they are mounted with 4 screws on both sides here, and then these 3 are height adjustment springs. You can see those here on the side. But if you take the pickup out, it's quite a large route underneath there, and you can see the letters NA for natural finish. And the route itself is kind of cool with how they did the adjustment spring places. They just kind of went whoopity-woo. This one kind of has a short lead on it, but it does say Les Paul Recording Rhythm. And it's epoxy coated similar to how the original ones are done. Bridge pickup, we have the same thing going on, but this one comes out a little bit further so you can see how they routed it better. And LPRC standing for Les Paul Recording. And this is the lead pickup. And right there you can see the channel for the neck pickup to go through. I also want to take a second just to appreciate how freaky this pick guard is. I mean, it's like triangular with these cutouts. You know, it's to fit over the pickups, but when you just see this plain by itself, it's just so weird looking. Goofy. On this particular example, the bridge has actually been replaced. They have completely new studs in it, so don't be alarmed by this metric styled bridge here. You can kind of see where they damaged the finish a little bit while doing that modification. So why in the world would somebody do that? Well, they wanted a roller bridge for the Bigsby to help it stay in tune. So instead of a set saddle, these will now roll. So it's a playability improvement, definitely, and probably should have came stock. But this one reads BM003. I went ahead and removed the Bigsby here, simply just to show you that there's no tailpiece studs anywhere. I mean, sure, you could convert it if you wanted to, just drill a tailpiece in here. But then you'll be left over with these 2 holes. This black thing, it's supposed to be attached to the Bigsby, it just kind of came off. But here you can see the impressions and light damages that the Bigsby causes just by being on the instrument. That's why I always warn people, even if you're using the Vibramate units, if you're putting it on for an extended period of time, these black little felt things that you put to protect it from rubbing against your instrument are actually harming the finish themselves. You might be able to buff those out, I'm not sure. It's more of like a clear coat reaction. This particular example, you can see it's got that 2-piece top seam. You can see it's a pretty thick top there. It's not just like one continuous piece of wood. It is a traditional top. The Bigsby body base looks like this. The only real thing to make mention of is it says LP, and then it says EX short. And now for the good stuff. I don't think anybody's ever seen what it looks like underneath here, you know, online. So let's go ahead and do this. Okay, so right here is that audio transformer we're talking about by Jensen. So this is what converts it into a low Z setting. Here's where you can see both of the output jacks. The one seen on your left is your low Z, the other one's your high Z. Then we've got our standard volume tone. But the only thing that's really different here is we got this PCB right here. And this is for all of the switches, as you can see right there. And then it's built on a quick connect system. So working on this really wouldn't be that difficult. You can see your pickups come out there. They just connect to right here and there. So if you wanted to modify this with different pickups for some reason, all you would need are these white quick connect versions from Gibson. And probably a router. But the outputs just connect right there. And then this is connecting from your 3-way switch. Then your audio output connects into there. So I'm not really sure how this wiring all works, but it does. And this is what it looks like. This is something I've always liked about this instrument. It's a 23.5 fret guitar. Well, it's more like 3/5 of a fret here. But they do this because they have to chop off the fretboard in order to fit these pickups in at a slight angle. Now, as we were kind of talking about earlier, what they left out on the Les Paul Recording 2, the reissue model, so to speak, is they don't have that cream binding on the inside. And I feel that really makes this look plain. That's a small little detailed feature that they should have left on the fretboard. But it is on a mahogany neck with a rosewood board. You've got the small inlays as they would on both of the Les Paul Recording styles. They did the correct looking binding for the body.
as well as the headstock, but for some reason left this guy out. We have a 1.68 inch nut width, which increases to 2.07 at the 12th. Neck depth at the first is 0.86, and pretty chunky at 1.02 at the 12th. And as usual, 24 3/4 inch scale. The truss rod cover strangely reads Les Paul Recording. I think it would have been cool if they would have put a 2 on that. But this is what it looks like under there. Truss rod looks like it's in good shape. And you've got your Gibson custom look right here. You've got the black and white bindings paired with the split diamond inlay and the Gibson logo. The backside of the instrument, there's no routing or anything since it's all top routed. It's kind of weird looking at a Les Paul body like this without something back here. But you do have a comfort cut right there. I don't think it's as pronounced as the original ones. At least not as pronounced as on the personals. But you do have the output jacks on the side, and they are labeled on this one, high Z and low Z. You've got a nice chunky neck on this one. It looks like someone was a little bit careless on this. Maybe it was a capo or something that kind of impressed the finish right there. But it is nice to see that they did put a volute on this one. It's kind of a throwback to the originals, so that's a nice feature. And you have Grover tuners on this one with a 2013 serial number and Made in USA stamp. True to the originals, this thing's pretty chunky, 10 pounds, 8 ounces.
Let's go through the tones now. Despite Gibson stripping some of the additional features out of this thing, it's still incredibly versatile, and it has a crap ton load of options, so it's going to take a while to do this. Starting off with all volumes and tones on 10, we've got the neck pickup in humbucker mode. Kind of has a really nice throatiness to it. But now we'll move it to single coil. Still has a nice sound to it. It's just not quite as throaty. I find myself always being on this position. It's so nice and jazzy. But if that's not enough for you, I find if you roll the tone down to 4, that is like the magic jazz tone. Now let's switch over to the middle. The middle is confusing because you can have both of these together in like single coil mode, or you can have them both together in humbucker mode, or either or. And then you can also use the out of phase position in the middle position. So let's try to get some of that going on here. We'll start with both in humbucking mode. Both in single. Neck and humbucking, bridge and single. Switched. Now you also have the in and out of phase. So we are now out of phase, both in humbucking mode. And single. second humbucker, this one in single. Flipped. So the out of phase kind of gives you like a honky-tonky sound. Kind of anemic sounding, but at the same time it's good for like funky stuff. Now we'll go with the bridge pickup in humbucking mode. Single coil. Now we'll roll the tone off to about 4 again. So that's a lot of versatility just right there. The bridge pickup's good for certain occasions, but I think the neck pickup really steals the show. I think it'd be interesting to have like an L5 with one of these pickups in it. Now I'll briefly show you the Bigsby. Despite this being made to be the best clean guitar ever, it actually sounds pretty decent distorted too. Just in case you're curious, if you accidentally plug it into the wrong one here, it still works, it's just a lot quieter. Okay, so I now have it plugged directly into my audio interface with the XLR cable using the low Z output. I'm not really sure what the difference is here. I know there's supposed to be a big one, but I'm not really big into recording, so maybe I just don't realize what I'm looking for here. But here's a few more examples. I'm not sure why. I get an electric shock when I switch it between the two. But now I have it through the high Z output. I don't really hear much of a difference. Now that we know how this instrument sounds, let's go ahead and review its condition. Okay, here we go. This thing is in okay shape. I mean, it's been played, but it's not destroyed. You've got very fine scratches on the face of the headstock from string change wear. Truss rod works perfectly just fine. Doesn't even look like it's been adjusted much. You've got some very light edge wear. I mean, nothing too crazy. I mean, you can definitely still display this one if you want, but there's a few modifications that I want to point out in case you missed them earlier. The nut, I believe, has been replaced because I do not see any lacquer over the sides, and it would kind of make sense because there's some other modifications on this guitar that they did to enhance the playability of it. The frets are in excellent shape. I did not see any like major fret wear. I mean, you're gonna have a little bit because it's been played, but for the most part, it's in really clean shape. I just oiled the fretboard, so it's looking good here, polished up those frets, and did the daunting task of putting new strings on it. The instrument itself, I just polished it up with some Virtuoso cleaner. I mean, you've got some polishing swirls and picking marks pretty much all over the instrument, but it presents pretty well. There are quite a few light nicks and dings, like it's kind of hard to see in there, but when I was installing it, the ball ends kept dinging up the finish. It was kind of annoying. I mean, it's nothing you're going to see all the time, but I think you can kind of see those small impressions there. You've got scratches on the control plate, you've got fingerprints, things like that, and lots of scratches on this pick guard. I mean, this thing must have been played quite a bit by its original owner. So if you can live with a few minor nicks and dings on the top, I think you'll be happy with this one. Again, some pickup scratches along the pickup covers themselves, and the bridge, the whole thing's been replaced. There's new studs in it and everything. I don't think they actually drilled it out for the new studs. I think they were supposed to. You can kind of see how the new stud pokes out a little bit there because it's not the proper size. But they did that because this is now a roller bridge, which kind of helps with the tuning stability of the Bigsby. But that's the end of the modifications that I could see anyways. The headstock here, we've got serial number 136430, looks like maybe 395. So it's a 2013 model, made the 364th day of the year. There's only 365 of those, so this is a New Year's Eve guitar. You've got some light marks on the back here, a very pronounced volute, which is nice. And then there's this. I'm not quite sure how this happened. There's some impressions on the neck. I count like 1, 2, 3, and kind of a fourth one up here. I'm guessing it was a capo that was maybe on the guitar for a long period of time. It feels like an impression to me, not necessarily finish missing. I think the blacklight will help us tell that. So you could take this to a luthier to do a quick little drop fill. I don't think it would take too long or be too expensive to do that. But you can definitely play it as is, but you will definitely feel this if you play with proper technique and have your thumb at the back of the neck. The way I play, I don't ever feel it though. I've also heard that you can take like a wet cloth and put a hot solder iron over it and it'll kind of like raise that area. I'm not skilled enough, so I'm not even gonna try that. The back of the instrument, you've got some light buckle marks. I mean, nothing too crazy here. We'll get it in the light so you can see all of that. I've got a nice little comfort carve right there. But beautiful mahogany wood grain. But this thing, it's a real workout holding this thing for an hour talking about it. We'll run it along the sides here. Similar wear to the rest of the guitar. Light nicks and dings. You've got some scratches. Here's a good look at the high Z, low Z outputs. And the end of the Bigsby there. So overall, is this a collectible one? I guess if you restored the original bridge, you could say it would be, but unfortunately I do not have that. So this is more so for somebody that just wants to play the Les Paul Recording 2. Do a quick blacklight test. Everything glows the way I would want to see on the front. Obviously it's not going to glow too much because it's not that old and appears to have been in its case a lot. But this might help show us if that's finish wear. Yeah, see, this looks like it's just an impression to me. So this one definitely passes the blacklight test. This is kind of an interesting spot. It almost looks like it didn't get stained correctly at the factory. I'll have to turn the light on and look at that for real quick. You can kind of see the same thing on this edge too. The wood's actually just a little bit lighter in that area. I don't know if it's just how the grain goes, or maybe Gibson didn't stain it properly. I mean, it's not overly present, but I mean, it is there, so I want you to know about it. This instrument retains its original Gibson USA case. You can see these are a little bit wider than a regular Les Paul case, but you've got all 4 latches. The case is in good shape. I mean, it's got some light scuffs, but nothing too bad here. The interior is nice and white, and you've got some light staining from like glue and a little bit of dirt up top, but you know, for the most part, it's in good shape. Inside here sleeps kind of this pre-pack inspected by checklist, and then you have your XLR to 1/4 inch cable in here as well. If you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this Les Paul Recording 2 model, feel free to check out the link in the description that will take you to the Reverb for Sale ad. Thank you, Troglodytes, for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.